Well, good evening, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's truly a huge pleasure to be here. Fear and love. We're being invited to focus on their mutual exclusivity, but I want first to point out that there is a certain ambiguity already. You can have both, as Machiavelli himself first conceded at the second half of his sentence, when only has to think of Hitler, Putin, Donald Trump, to know that such individuals, I don't have to invoke fictional characters, they attract both emotions. So the first thing I'd like to do is try and clarify what the two terms actually mean and how we're going to regard them as we go forward. Let's take fear first. Fear is when the tiger is rushing after you and you have the adrenaline rush. Clearly, that's not really what we mean here. More fear as we become more sophisticated and when we avoid tigers is when we have to imagine the consequences of something unknown. I gather that inmates on death row, for example, die 1,000 times because they are imagining the unimaginable. So fear occurs when you are trying to anticipate something and you don't know quite what's going to happen. So what does that mean when we say that you're frightened of a person? If you are the leader, someone's going to be frightened of you. What does that actually mean? I would like to suggest to you that what you're frightened of is what that person is going to do to you. And if that is the case, really the motion before this House implies that really the proposition are arguing for a preference to be a person who has power over others. Now, if that's the case, we need to think of total power by definition that's intolerant of opposition. I'm afraid I have to turn again to Hitler, Putin, and I'm afraid Donald Trump. I wonder if when he made his inaugural speech, Donald Trump was aware that the slogan, America First, which he repeated over and over again, was actually first introduced in 1915. It was adopted by the Ku Klux Klan and then taken up by the fascist anti-Semite Lindbergh. So clearly, perhaps he doesn't know his history, or was he even subscribing to that kind of intention? Did he want people to subscribe to a kind of regime characterized by those individuals where you insist on a conformity and no individuality? Everyone has to be the same, and you are intolerant of any deviation, any diversity, anything different. Why would you want to follow such an individual? Or why would you want to even be such an individual? Some people might be familiar with the German journalist Sebastian Haffner in the 1930s wrote a really insightful narrative, a journal, of what it was like under Hitler and the growing power of the fascist regime. It was written in 1939, and it was a memoir really of just the ordinary citizens. And the central argument, it was called Defying Hitler, if you would like to look it up, is that a decent, compassionate people suffered from a weak self-image, and they were thus very vulnerable to a collective identity and one imposed externally by a powerfully effective indoctrination. Does that sound familiar? So identity is a crucial thing here, and I think this is a feature that we've not heard much about from either sides of the House as yet. The identity proposed by someone who wants to rule by fear is that you are better than any other group. You are exceptional. And so what will happen? You are exceptional, but at the same time, you have to be better than other people, but you have to have a conformity and a uniformity. So what would it be like in the long term if you ruled in such a way, both for you and the people that you were ruling? You'd be in constant need. It'd be quite exhausting. You have to keep drumming up hatred. You have to keep drumming up diversion. And that surely would mean you're less productive in other activities. And most importantly of all, ladies and gentlemen, I think you yourself would be afraid that you might eventually have such power taken away from you. If you rule by fear, I submit, you too will live in fear. You will be frightened. So what's the alternative? Let's get on to love. You can, after all, make people fear you, but you can't, as perhaps the president knows, make people love you. So it's a bit trickier here now, ladies and gentlemen, because what we have to see is this thing that you can't make people do, how can that be morphed into a form of leadership? So I think we need to define love. And I think, again, let's squash once and for all. Thank you. Okay. Do I sound hoarse? No, I was just very kind. Sorry. Okay. So I think we need to define love. Sorry to sound as if I'm writing a first-year essay here, but we need to define. I'm sure you're very familiar, ladies and gentlemen, with C.S. Lewis, who said there's 4 types of love. And let's get out of the way all this love we've been hearing about to date, which is eros, or romantic love. That's not on the cards at this stage. There's also charity, agape, affection, storge, and friendship, philia. And these are the ones that C.S. Lewis, I'm sure you're familiar with, differentiated as different types of love. Now, what's interesting is friendship, philia, because that's actually regarded as the opposite of phobia. And fear, therefore, if this is the opposite of phobia, that's the one we should be focusing on. Not erotic love, but philia, some kind of friendship. How can philia be turned into leadership? What are the advantages of philia over phobia? Let's return to the all-important issue that I raised at the beginning with the appeal of the fascist regime and certain movements on the other side of the pond, which is the notions of identity and the power of having a superior identity as opposed to an individual identity. I want to persuade you that philia, unlike phobia, promotes individuals rather than obliterating it, and I think that is the key difference. Now, I'm now coming on to very familiar home territory, which is that of neuroscience, as you've heard, because that's what we neuroscientists work on. We work on what makes you different from me, what makes you a unique individual, even though you might be a clone, an identical twin. That's to say someone with the same genes as someone else. You are still an individual, as I'm sure there may be 1 or 2 identical twins here will testify. So when you're born with pretty much all the brain cells you have, but it's the growth of the connections between the brain cells that characterizes the postnatal growth of the human brain. And those connections are formed and changed and so updated by your individual experience. So even if you are a clone, you're going to have a unique configuration of brain cell connections that are constantly changed throughout your life and interpreting in the context of which you live. This means we occupy more ecological niches than any other species on the planet. And it's not because we run fast, and it's not because we're strong or we see well compared to other species. It is because we have this amazing ability to adapt to our environment and learn from experiences and so become the unique individuals that we are. In the 100,000 years that we as a species have stalked the planet, no one is like you, nor will they ever be again. And that is something, surely, that we prize and something that we promote, and I would argue that makes much of life worth living. Neuroscience is about the study of individuality. We are mandated to be unique as a species. That is your evolutionary birthright. So what kind of leader could help you there? What kind of leader might help someone fulfill their true potential so that as a consequence, if you offer that, people will be connected to you. They'll want to be connected to you, not because you have power over them, but because you are enabling them to be true individuals, to realize their true potential. Now, this was a philosophy first mooted back in 1970. You might be familiar with someone called Robert Greenleaf, who coined the notion of the servant leader. And although that might sound like a paradox, one can think of examples like Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King. I have a dream. It's where you are not getting power for the sake of it for yourself or because you want to have power over others. It's because you want to recruit them to help you fulfill a bigger vision, a bigger world, a better dream. Having this kind of goal, this kind of vision, is what distinguishes the leader, by the way, from a mere manager. If you say, tote this barge, crew that bowl, or whatever, it's not the same as saying, imagine if we could do this together. Just imagine if we could do this. Imagine how exciting that would be. That's what makes a leader, not a manager, and that is not fear. That is philia at work. By putting the needs of others first, you empower people to perform at their best, and therefore they will work with you, and you will be able to lead them without making them frightened. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, I think this is what the choice amounts to. 1, do you want to lead a society where you are constantly paranoid you're going to be displaced by someone else, and you have to spend so much of your time and energy taking up suppressing individuality in others so you can promote a collective homogenized identity? One, of course, that's better than everyone else, superior to everyone else. Or are you going to lead a society of diverse individuals following their neuroscience mandate, where each has the dream of fulfilling their own specific potential? And the more diverse and different that is, how much better a society that will be. So the key concepts here are individuality and vision, and I would argue that the one interacts and is linked very much to the other. Now, what sort of person is best suited to having vision, to promoting individuality, to having novel ideas? Well, of course, philosophers. And one then turns, of course, to Plato, who realized that the futility of power meant that the best leaders were philosophers. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, allow me to conclude by quoting from the Republic. Until philosophers are kings, or the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, and political greatness and wisdom meet in one, then only then will this our state have the possibility of life and behold the light of day. Thank you very much.